Hey guys, so I've been doing my research on defense spending for you all. I got a whole lot of numbers here, but I want to make these as easy to understand as possible. And I don't have a definitive answer, but I would like to pose the question, and then we would just have to try to make some assumptions. But the question is, would we be any less safe if we made a massive 50% cut to our defense spending? Okay. Now, through a lot of this video, I'm going to be looking down because I took a lot of notes here. But what I started with was I told you all I was going to do the percentage of GDP. The reason I decided to do that was because it's not really fair if you look at, like, let's say America compared to Germany, because our population is so much bigger, and that kind of skews things. So if you take it as a percentage of GDP, how well do we do? And I'm just going to read in alphabetical order some countries and what percent of their GDP do they spend on defense spending. So Australia is 2%, Canada 1.3, China 1.9, Finland 1.4, France 2.3, Germany 1.2, India 2.5%, Italy 1.5, Japan 0.9%, Mexico 0.5%. I would never have guessed that being that low. New Zealand 1.2, Poland 2.0, Portugal 1.7. This one shocked me. Russia 4.3%, the biggest one on this list. Spain 1.2, and the United States second at 3.1%. So, in terms of spending money relative to the gross domestic product, we are second behind only Russia out of these developed nations that I just grabbed at random off the massive list of countries. Okay. I left off the Middle Eastern countries because the numbers were just ungodly, and some of them don't even really have any GDP, so it didn't work. So then I thought, okay, so you look at 3.1 to I looked at India's 2.5, who came in third. And that doesn't sound like a big jump, but it's actually a 26% increase as a percentage of GDP to go from 2.5% to 3.1%. So it's a massive percentage increase in money that you are spending. So then I thought, well, what do we spend in the world on defense spending every year? The world as a whole, and these numbers are through 2018, last year spent $1.8 trillion. Okay. Out of that, 1.8 trillion for the world, we spent 649 billion. Okay, we were over a third of the entire world's defense spending. The second highest country is China at 250 billion. So we spend roughly a little more than double what China does in their second. After that, it drops like a rock. So I didn't do everybody. 26 billion in Australia, 21 in Canada, 63 in France, 49 in Germany, 66 in India, 27 in Italy, 46 in Japan, and in Russia, ironically, for having such a large percent of their GDP, only spend 61 billion on defense. So there's your total dollar outlay. So what I want to know is, can we cut that 649 billion in half and use that for either middle class tax cuts or for essential services, teachers, firemen, police, things of that nature? So the problem that happens whenever anybody says that they want to cut defense spending is that the knee-jerk reaction, mostly from the right, is that money being spent is making us safer. And if we start to draw that money down, we will no longer be as safe as we are at this exact minute. But I pulled some data that I think proves that that's not really true. So for the $649 billion we spent last year on defense, we lost 95 people to terrorism-related deaths last year, okay? Now, Australia spent $26 billion and lost 4. The worst offender on my list was India, who lost 465 people last year to terrorist attacks and acts of terrorism, to R95. Next highest would be Russia at 61, then Spain 21, China 16, And then it kind of falls below 10. Like Canada only lost 6, Australia 4, France 7, Germany 1 person last year to acts of terrorism. So if we're spending $649 billion and we're losing 95 people, but yet Germany is spending 49 billion and only losing 1, Germany only spent 1.2% of its GDP on defense to our 3.1. So that's darn near triple, almost a 300% increase. And the difference is 1 versus 95. To put that in context for you, 35 children last year were killed in random school shootings that were not considered terrorism, okay? So over a third of the number of citizens who died due to acts of terrorism also died due to random school shootings that were not terror-related. To put that in further context, for the third straight year last year, we lost over 40,000 people to auto crashes in America last year. So that's a pretty big number of people to lose driving their car, but that $649 billion in defense isn't doing anything to make that any safer. And it's not doing anything to make the 35 we lost in schools safer. So I am going to go ahead and posit a hypothesis here that we could indeed cut our funding on defense in half, and we would be just as safe as we are today. There's also another way of looking at this in terms of economics, and it's called per capita. What per capita means is per citizen, per person. So if you want to look at it in terms of what do these countries spend per citizen on defense spending, I looked it up, and we are the 4th highest country in the world at what we spend on defense per person. Number 1 is Saudi Arabia, number 2 is Singapore, and number 3 is Israel. And then there's us at 4th. Most of these other countries didn't even make the top 10 on defense spending per person, yet they lost between 21 and us 95 people due to terror last year. And India would be your outlier at losing 465 people, but 465 deaths due to terrorist activities compared to 40,000 deaths on auto crashes still, to me, makes it seem like we are way overspending on something that is not doing anything to make us any safer than we would be right now. So, it's just something that we need to think about. I think too many of us are thinking about 9/11 style terror attacks that don't really happen anymore. As I pulled these stats, the one thing I came across more and more is that with the dismantling of Al-Qaeda and ISIS over the years, we're not left with any more of these big 9/11 mastermind type plans. And what we've been reduced to is single or double people going out there and committing acts of terror, generally suicide attacks, in which they can hit as many targets as possible at one time. Like, let's say you would walk into a crowded room and blow yourself up. We're not really dealing with these big scale terror attacks anymore. So to me, where we're at here now, almost 20 years after the fact, and with world terrorism way declined from what it was back when 9/11 happened, I believe we are spending a whole lot of money on defense that's not actually adding any benefit. So let's pretend for a minute that if we cut our defense spending in half, we still lost 95 people to terrorism. That would mean that every dollar spent above that was wasted, or not saving any more lives, or not preventing any more attacks. And with certain countries only spending 1.2, 0.9% of their GDP on defense, while we spend 3.1, tells me that it's an overspend right then and there. And then the fact that we spend over a third of the entire planet's money on defense, yet we lost 95 people to India's 465. So it's just I think it's just a canard that we walk into, especially Republicans. I don't mean to knock you all on this, but I think it's just a mindset that we've had ever since 9/11 that if we take a penny away from defense, we are less safe because of that. And I don't think that's true at all. I think that even if we cut it in half, we would still be the largest country in defense spending over China by 33%. Okay, so we would still be spending more than them, and they lost 16 people last year for their $250 billion investment. I think they're overspending as well. So it's a thing that I think we've ingrained in ourselves for so long, and it's a pattern of behavior that we can't fathom for a minute that maybe things have changed. And maybe they aren't the way they were 20 years ago. When 9/11 happened, I was in college at University of Kentucky and working for TWA. It's been 19 years, guys, or 18 years, I guess. That's 1.8 decades, and a lot of things change in that time. But the way we have treated our defense spending hasn't changed at all. We are still radically paying a whole lot of money for something that falls into that discretionary category I told you all about, where I think we could deploy that money to better use. Now, some of the people on the Democratic list for president have said that they would, do a tax on the super rich to pay for Medicare for all. I think I do think the rich should pay more in taxes, but I think we've got about $300 billion just laying here that is being wasted and is not gaining us any more benefit. So 95 people in a year, I was shocked. I really thought that it would have been, a couple thousand, 3,000 people. 95 last year kind of shocked me, considering that like inner city Chicago lost over 300 people last year in crime-related deaths. So, and that was just one city, not even a state. So I think we're really overspending here, and I think it's worth doing some soul searching and asking ourselves, could we take this $300 billion and put it towards something that would better us as a society? And I think the answer to that is a glaring yes in my book. Now, you might not believe it's a glaring yes, and you might not even believe it's a maybe, but I think it's worth thinking about and walking down this road and asking ourselves, are we living in the same world we lived in 18 years ago? And if we're not, which it appears based on all the research and the studies and all that we're not living in the same world we were 18 years ago, that's $300 billion that could easily be allocated to education, public safety, things of that nature, that where we're throwing it away today and we're overpaying for something we're not getting. So just food for thought. I would like to see us do it. A lot of Democrats mention it as something they would be very happy to do, but they're not the ones that are running for president either. So generally it's talk show hosts and pundits who are willing to come out and say it. And I don't think we're going to get a presidential candidate on the left this year who would even put that forth as a hypothesis, because of the knee-jerk reaction we as a country will have over, are we losing safety if we do that? And I think based on the data, that would not be true. I do not think we would lose any safety if Italy spends $27 billion and loses no one, and Canada spends $21 billion and loses $6. It's a little bit crazy that we move all the way up to $695 billion a year to lose only 95 people. That's just, it doesn't seem to work out for me numerically that we would do that. So something to think about. Again, let's not make it a flame war. Let's not, make it let's make it a bipartisan issue. We're all willing to be open-minded about the fact that, maybe there is a place where we have found a large chunk of money that we don't need to spend every year because it's paying above and beyond for what we need to keep us as safe as we are today. We'll do another topic later. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.